What if the greatest maritime disaster in history wasn't caused by the iceberg alone? What if the real tragedy began hours earlier, when desperate warnings were sent across the freezing Atlantic and nobody listened? On the night Titanic sank, signals flashed through the darkness. Radio operators called for help, and nearby ships received messages that could have changed everything. Yet somehow, many of those warnings went unanswered. The story of Titanic is not just about a ship hitting an iceberg. It is the story of missed chances, ignored signals, and one terrifying night when help may have been closer than anyone realized. On April 10, 1912, the magnificent RMS Titanic departed on her maiden voyage from Southampton, bound for New York City. At over 46,000 tons, Titanic was the largest passenger ship ever built. Newspapers called her nearly unsinkable. Passengers enjoyed luxurious dining rooms, grand staircases, electric lighting, and comforts that seemed unimaginable for an ocean voyage. But beneath the confidence and celebration, danger was already waiting. As Titanic crossed the North Atlantic, several ships reported unusually heavy ice conditions. Icebergs and large ice fields had drifted farther south than expected. Throughout April 14th, wireless operators aboard Titanic received message after message warning of ice ahead. One warning came from the steamship SS Mesaba. The message provided precise coordinates of dangerous ice directly along Titanic's route. Another warning arrived from the SS Californian, reporting that it had stopped completely because surrounding ice made navigation unsafe. Yet many of these warnings never reached the bridge in a meaningful way. Titanic's wireless operators were overwhelmed with passenger messages being transmitted to shore stations. Some ice warnings were delivered, others were delayed. A few were acknowledged but not treated as urgent threats. The ship continued forward at nearly full speed despite growing evidence that the region ahead was becoming increasingly dangerous. Then came the night of April 14th. The ocean was unusually calm. There was little wind and almost no moonlight. Ironically, these conditions made icebergs harder to spot because waves normally breaking against the ice would have created visible whitewater. At 11:40 p.m., lookouts finally saw an iceberg directly ahead. The alarm bell rang, an emergency call reached the bridge. Orders were given to turn, but it was too late. The iceberg scraped along Titanic's starboard side, opening multiple sections of the hull below the waterline. At first, many passengers barely noticed the collision. There was no dramatic impact, no massive explosion, only a slight vibration and the feeling that something unusual had happened. Below deck, however, seawater was already flooding into the ship. Within minutes, Titanic's officers realized the damage was fatal. The world's most famous ocean liner was sinking. Now, the wireless room became the center of a desperate race against time. Operators began transmitting distress signals across the Atlantic. They used CQD, the traditional distress call, and also SOS, a newer emergency signal that few people had yet experienced during a real disaster. The messages were urgent. The messages were clear, and they were heard. Several ships received Titanic's calls for help. Among them was the passenger liner RMS Carpathia. Although more than 50 miles away, Carpathia immediately changed course and raced through dangerous ice fields toward Titanic's position. But another ship may have been much closer. The SS Californian had stopped for the night because of heavy ice. According to later testimony, crew members saw rockets being fired from a ship on the horizon after midnight. These were likely distress flares, but confusion spread because such signals were not clearly standardized at the time. Some officers thought the lights were just company signals, not an emergency. Others were unsure and did not act decisively. Meanwhile, the Californian's wireless operator had already gone off duty, so no one was actively listening. Earlier, Californian had tried to warn Titanic about ice. Titanic's wireless room was busy with passenger messages, so the exchange was brief and tense, and the communication ended. After that, the radio went silent for the night. As Titanic began to sink, no one on Californian was receiving messages. This later became one of the most debated controversies of the disaster, whether Californian was close enough to help and whether action could have saved more lives. Meanwhile, Titanic kept sending SOS calls as the situation worsened. The bow slowly dipped underwater. Lifeboats were launched half-empty. Passengers stood on freezing decks while distress signals flashed into the night. Inside the wireless room, operators kept sending messages until the very end. Some ships received them, others never did. At around 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, RMS Titanic finally sank beneath the Atlantic. More than 1,500 lives were lost. Hours later, Carpathia arrived and rescued survivors from lifeboats. The disaster shocked the world and exposed serious flaws in maritime communication. It led to major reforms, including 24-hour radio watches and improved safety systems at sea. Even today, the Titanic story is not only about an iceberg, but about unanswered signals, missed warnings, and the haunting question of how close help truly was that night.